welcome to episode 10 of the Unhitching Hour. Episode 10. So X. My name is Reed Aronson. I'm a matrimonial lawyer here in New York City.
And I'm Vanessa Aronson. I'm Reed's wife, and I am not a lawyer, but I'm here along for the ride to learn about matrimonial law and weigh in about how I think it should be.
So this show is the Unhitching Hour, how the law works when your relationship doesn't. The purpose of this show is to educate people about how family law, divorce law, matrimonial law works, so that they can feel more empowered if they are going through some sort of major life event, or if they have a friend or family member who is, they can talk them through it and maybe get a better sense of what it is that a court would do or the law would do with their particular situation. And so that's our show. And the format, the way we do this is I will talk to you about a particular topic. I will present a case that really took place on that topic. And Vanessa and I will talk through it and discuss what she thinks the result should be, based not necessarily on the law, but on her sense of fairness and her understanding of what is right and wrong, and maybe just common sense. And then we'll talk through how that works, how and then just more generally about it, and hopefully that'll arm everybody with a little bit of knowledge today.
That sounds great.
Sounds great.
What are we discussing today, Reed?
So today we are discussing imputed income. Imputed income. So let me set that up a little bit, because that, sometimes you get a little jargony and it gets a little scary, but it's a pretty simple concept, actually. So imagine, Vanessa, that you are a judge, okay? You're a judge and you're trying to figure out how much support somebody should pay, right? You've got a spouse or a parent who has to pay some amount of support to the other spouse or the other parent. What do you think the first step would be in figuring out what they should pay?
Figuring out what they make?
Exactly. That is exactly right. The first step, right, before you're going to be able to figure that out is what's people's income, right? What do they earn a year? What do they make? Because what they make is going to be what they're able to pay, because you can't pay more than you make, theoretically, maybe in some circumstances, but you have to have money to support yourself, and you have to have money to support whoever you're with. So you got to figure out what their income is. What would be so that's your job. Your job is to figure out what somebody's income is. If let's say you could only get one document, and you can only ask that person that you're trying to figure out their income for one document. What do you think that document would be?
Their tax return.
Their tax return. Okay, right? Because their tax return is going to say what they claim to make, right? It's going to say what their salary is. It's going to say what they make maybe on investments and things like that. It's going to have it's going to be theoretically sworn to by them, right? That there are penalties for lying. There's an enforcement mechanism if they're lying, right? That the court doesn't have to sit there necessarily and worry that nobody's ever looked at this. There might even be an accountant, right, who signs it, not necessarily stating it's totally accurate, but at least giving some sense that this is not just completely made up,
yep.
Right? So you're committing to that number. But here's the thing. Sometimes a tax return is not always going to tell the whole story, right? A tax return is going to have gaps or holes or things that it might miss. And when that happens, you may have to impute income, or there might be imputed income. So let's look at the case, and we're going to talk about how that works how this works in practice, like why you might have to go past the tax return.
All right. Sounds like a plan.
Share screen.
This week's case is called Dion versus.
Sorry. Let me back up. Stop that share. I think I muted myself, unfortunately. So let me do that again.
This is Dion from Brooklyn in 2019. Maurice had 2 children with his wife, Jennifer. They were getting divorced, and the question was, how much support would Maurice have to pay Jennifer, both spousal support and child support? And to answer that, we needed to know what's his income. According to Maurice, he made less than nothing. He came to this conclusion by taking his $40,000 in income and subtracting $200,000 in carryover business losses from about 10 years ago. Now, this was curious because Maurice, despite claiming poverty, lived in a 5-bedroom house. He took very expensive travel with the children, and whenever he would pick the children up, he would have a private car with a driver. So how did he afford all these things if he was making no money? The answer was Maurice's mother. Maurice lived with his mother in the 5-bedroom house. He worked for his mother's business, making about $40,000 a year in salary. And his mother's business loaned him money to pay for a car and driver and travel to pursue sales opportunities, and he would bring the children along. So the question is, are these items part of Maurice's income for the purposes of determining support?
Okay, so that's the setup. Got this guy whose tax returns say he makes less than nothing because he only makes $40,000 a year in salary, and he's got all of these losses from 10 years ago that he's still able to put on his taxes. Look, for those of you who don't, I'm not a huge tax person, but basically, if you have a business loss, you can use that business loss to offset future income, and that's what he's been doing. So he pays no taxes. He has no taxable income, but he's got all of these other things that he has the advantage of because of who he works for. So do you think that those things should get factored into what he should pay in child support?
Okay. Do we know, did Maurice live with his mother when he was married and the children were with him?
I believe it's not explicit, but the implication is no. When he lived with his wife, he lived with his wife. But after that, he moved out. And after he moved out from them, he moved in with his mother.
Oh, okay. So when they were married, did he have income?
When they were married, he had income and he made money and he paid money on his taxes. So he supported when they were married. Well, they're still technically married, but when they were together, he supported a nice lifestyle.
So this tax return is not from when they were together?
This tax return is from the year after they separated.
Okay, so from the year, so he had some sort of income. Was he working for his mother still at that time?
It's unclear. He was working for somebody, but he isn't certain whether the company that he used to work for was his mother's.
Okay. So he used to make a lot of money. He got separated, suddenly is making no money. but again, has all of these luxuries in his life that he's able to afford. Do we know, does his mother give him money to spend on things, or does she purchase it outright?
Some of the things, yeah, some of the things are one and some of the things are the other. So he doesn't pay for the house that he lives in.
Right.
He just lives there for free.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if he pays for the driver, but a lot of the things, what happens is the business that he works for, which is owned by his mother, gives him loans, and they call them loans. And those loans are designed, the ostensible purpose of those loans is so that he has money to grow the business, right? It's a sales business, so he's got to travel to meet buyers. He's got to go there. They specifically say in the decision, he goes to Home Depot, he goes to Lowe's, places like that, to try and sell the product that the company makes. And in order to do that, he's got to have money. And so he uses that money to pay for travel. And when he travels, he says, you know what, I've got this money for travel. I'll take my kids with me. And that's what he does. And that's how he pays for those things. So it's a little bit of both. Some of the things the mother pays for directly, other things the company gives him money that he is supposedly supposed to pay back,
Okay.
and he uses that money to pay for other things.
And that was my next question is he does need to pay the money back. Are there okay, well that's the question. Is there a loan document? If it's actually a loan, there should be a document of some sort, correct?
Yes. It does not say whether there's actually any formal documentation of the loan. So I can't answer that question.
All right. Okay. All right. Well, now I can start to think a little bit.
But I will say this: there is no evidence that he has ever paid back these loans.
Okay. So first, I think it can't be a loan unless there's a loan document, I think.
Okay.
So therefore, it is a gift of some sort.
Okay.
Which I do believe is taxable to a certain at a certain extent, right? So if there's no loan document, then it's a gift, and it should have been documented on his tax return, is what I think.
Okay.
Okay.
So how does that
I know. Well, okay. So so that would make his income more than 40,000. I wish I understood more how the business, what did you call it? Like the business losses that you can claim on your tax.
It's from a private. So see, he used to have his own business about a decade ago. It failed. He lost a lot of money on it, and as a result, he says, "Now I have all of these losses. You can only use them to offset income. You can't go and say I want the federal government to pay me money. You can only use them to offset income, and he has not had enough income to offset all of those losses yet. So
Right.
he's got more of those losses to what's called carry forward, and so he's applied $40,000 of those losses to this year's income, so he ends up with zero.
I still think, I don't know, like if he had the children in his care, like he would have to pay something for them. Like let's pretend there wasn't another spouse, right? So there's no other spouse, there's just him and some children. He would need to use money somewhere to feed and clothe them, just like he needs to use money somewhere to feed and clothe and house himself, right? So I feel like it should be used, like it should be calculated. And I'm getting, okay, so I feel like at the very, very least, the 40,000 should be used as his income, not the negative 160,000. At the very least, that should be used because he presumably had to use it to spend money on something. I'm a little wary of stepping into what I'm going to say next, which is about the housing. That having a free housing arrangement should be somehow considered. But I also know that there are a lot of different circumstances in which people have housing paid for, like in the military or when I was in the Foreign Service, and I don't think that's not considered part of the tax return. So I'm like a little bit scared to step into that territory, but there's something about the fact that his housing is being provided for him that I feel like should be taken into a fact that the 40,000 is not being paid for housing. So therefore some chunk of it should be.
So let me ask you if this changes the way you look at it. It turns out that he was the title owner of the house about 5 years ago before he then sold it to his mother. Does that change your view? Does that affect how you look at it?
Well, where did that money go? That he sold it.
He didn't sell it for very much. It went to pay off the mortgage.
Okay.
He didn't realize anything.
I mean, look, yes, in that like what it very much looks like is that he's just trying to hide money so that he doesn't have to pay for child support. Like that's exactly what it looks like, right? That he's trying to, suddenly he's not making any money, suddenly he has no house, suddenly he has no, like that's what it looks like. But I'm also trying to give him a little bit of the benefit of the doubt and figure out like what should actually be, or maybe not him the benefit of the doubt, but like just in general, if someone's in that situation, what should happen.
Okay, so we've gone through the tax losses,
Yeah.
which you think shouldn't really be factored in, right? It should be whatever he earns, that's income. The housing, he thinks some part of it. What about the car and driver and the travel? Should the money that he gets in those loans, should those be included? And you said yes.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
again, because like part of me was saying it's either, I guess it's a little bit trickier if the mother, to me, it feels a little trickier if the mother like is paying for the driver up front. Like it's just, then it's a gift, but then how do you, the gift of a service, I don't know if that's taxed.
So gifts are taxed, the tax is paid by the giver, not by the person who receives it. So if there's a gift and it's over a certain threshold, and I don't want to say what that number is, I think it's like $27,000, but I'm not certain. If it's over a certain threshold, either for a year or for a lifetime, you have to pay, there's a gift tax that the person who gives the gift has to pay.
Well, still, that might change how generous his mother ends up being if they were to consider it a gift, right? That might have implications.
But they're calling it a business expense. Does that not matter to you what they're calling it? The fact that the company that she owns, they're calling it a business expense, or they're calling it actually a loan, so it wouldn't be an expense. But theoretically, even if they never get paid back, it would still be an expense, right? They paid for their employee to do a thing. Why is that not? Why don't we just take them at face value?
I guess because when we're talking about child support, there are pieces of this. Well, okay. Let me back up and say, sure, can we prove that he only uses the car service when he's actually going on a business call?
Good question.
So sure, it's a business expense, but then he shouldn't have, like, then what is his transportation when he has the children and it's not a business trip? Like that, then to me, if it's a business expense, it has to be completely separate.
Okay. So I think we've gone through everything.
Okay.
You basically got it right.
Oh.
Okay. The judge in this case, who is a judge named Judge Sunshine, or Justice Sunshine, who I name not only because his name is awesome, but also because he happens to be just one of the very influential matrimonial judges in New York, looks through it and he imputes income. He basically says almost all of this money that he's getting in whatever form, either in the form of expenses that are paid for him or in the form of tax relief, all of those things, their income for the purposes of child support. He imputes about $500,000 worth of income to this guy.
Can you back up and just explain, like, the verb to impute income means to do what?
For the purposes of calculating what the number is, we're going to assume that that's what he makes, right? That's the number we're going to take, and it's not in his tax return, right? So you've got tax return income, that's real, real income, and then you've got imputed income, which is income that maybe you don't earn it technically as a matter, but we're going to consider that you do for the purposes,
okay.
for the purpose of calculating what you owe in child support. We're going to treat this as if it is income.
Okay.
And that's what they do. He does it for the driver. He does it for all of the travel. And he says, there's some amount of money that the father is getting directly from his parents. We're going to call that income. And then there's a certain amount of money that the father is getting, is getting paid for expenses for the children and for himself that we're going to impute to the father. Okay. And that's how the court looks at it. And what I like about this case, and what I think it's interesting, is that when we're figuring out what kind of things might be imputed income, right? If you're a lawyer and you're looking at a case and somebody gives you a tax return that shows really low income compared to what you think they should make, you look at it and you say, okay, where can we maybe impute income? Where can we maybe find places that are not on the tax return, but ought to be considered in the scope of a child support calculation. And one of the, a few, and if this ticks a few of those boxes. And I have, because this is a very high tech show, I have visual aid. So the first one is a closely held or family business. And what do I mean by that? Imagine you are the sole owner of your business and your goal is to lower your income for the purpose of child support, right? Or just frankly, just lower your tax bill, right? You might just want to lower your taxes because that's what you're trying to do. You could in any given year say, well, instead of, normally I pay myself a salary of $100,000 or whatever the number is. But this year, because I know I'm getting divorced, and also because maybe it'll help me with my tax bill, I'm going to pay myself nothing. And I'm going to leave all that money in the business. I'll maybe buy some new equipment, or I'll hire somebody new who I know will be a big producer going forward, or something like that, or whatever, right? You have a lot of control. The same thing is true in a family business, right? Because you are working, you have people that you trust. So you might even go to if your brother is the CEO, or you guys are the two people who work there, and you say, hey brother, I have this issue where I know I'm going to end up paying child support, and I want to pay as little as possible. So how about this? How about you cut my salary this year to 25%? But in the meantime, I know mom and dad are going to give me some gifts, and you're going to give me some gifts. And by the way, I fully expect, although I don't know for certain, wink, wink, that you'll raise my salary back up once this whole difficulty with my ex-wife is dealt with. So when you have that sort of a situation, and by the way, I'm not suggesting that is always the situation. There are a lot of closely held businesses. There are a lot of family businesses that are totally above board. So I would never suggest that they're not, but it also provides an opportunity that, like, if you work for a big company, it's not, right? If you work for a giant law firm, you're not going to be able to go to the managing partner of that law firm and say, hey, wink, wink, why don't you help me commit a fraud, right? Or help me, maybe not even commit a fraud, but why don't you help me pull a fast one? They're not going to help you. Whereas some businesses, you might be able to do that because you have that sort of connection. Do we have any questions that maybe we want to answer?
Not
trial by combat. That armor will represent a significant portion of the wealth. I like it. Good idea. Although if you do trial by combat and their armor is worth a lot of money, then their armor is not going to be worth quite as much, right? It's going to be all banged up. All right, so that's the first one. The second one is perks and paid expenses, right? That's another thing that we had in this case, right? So there are perks and paid expenses, right? If you have a business that is paying for, let's say, your meals, those might be perfectly valid business expenses, right? If you take a client out to a fancy dinner and you pay for your dinner and you pay for the client's dinner, you might be able to say that that's a business expense and that should be paid by my business and should be deductible on the taxes, right? But for the purposes of a child support, okay, but that's now an expense that you don't have to pay, right? So if let's say that you're a person who every lunch, right? Every lunch, 365 days a year, you take a client and you take them out for lunch and you get a nice lunch and you pay for it on your corporate credit card. That's now an expense that you don't have to pay, and it might be an expense that you can deduct. But now you don't, in your life, when we're considering how you have to support yourself, you don't have to pay for lunch ever. So that's a huge weight off of your shoulders. We're gonna call that income. Just because you pay it as a business expense rather than getting it as salary and then paying it yourself, right? Because if you got an extra $100,000 in salary and then you bought yourself lunch, that would be your income. The fact that you skip the middleman and just have your company go and pay the $100,000 for you to have lunch every day shouldn't change what we think of you as your income for the purposes of child support.
That makes sense.
So the third one, high expenses. And by high expenses, I mean suspiciously high expenses in comparison to your income. So let's say that you go to court and you have a tax return that shows that I made $50,000 last year. But then we look at your credit card bill. And your credit card bill shows that you made, that you paid $50,000 last year just in gambling debts, right? Gambling might be a slightly extreme example, but entertainment expenses. You went and you you have $50,000 worth of season tickets to the Knicks,
Okay.
and you've got another $150,000 worth of travel expenses, and you've got another $250,000 worth of clothing expenses. We're going to look and we're going to say, okay, whatever you're saying on your tax return, and by the way, it might be perfectly legal, right? It might be a perfectly legal way that you've set up your finances so that you're not paying a lot in taxes. But if somehow you've got enough cash flow to pay for all of the things that I'm describing, a judge is going to look and get to say, okay, how about this? How about however you're getting that cash flow to pay for your expensive travel and your Knicks tickets and all of those things? How about you redirect a little bit of that and you pay it to your ex-wife and to your kids, right? Or for your ex-wife and for your kids. So that's going to be a thing that's going to set off a notion. Maybe there should be some imputed income. Fourth, did I get to four? Sorry. Four, voluntary unemployment or voluntary underemployment. Okay. So what do I mean by that? Extreme example. The day before you file for divorce, you quit your job and you go and you say, you know what? I don't want to work at this high pressure, high stakes law firm anymore where I'm making $500,000 a year. I want to be a teacher. So you quit your job making $500,000 a year and you get a job teaching the law for $50,000 a year, right? Well, now I'm only making $50,000 a year. A judge in that scenario, that sort of an extreme scenario, is going to look and going to say, you're voluntarily unemployed. You have the wherewithal. You have the ability to earn way more money. And I know that because you were 5 minutes ago. And the fact that you've made a voluntary choice to decrease your income. Now, by the way, there's nothing wrong with that in terms of tax law, right? There's no tax law that says you have to earn the maximum amount of money that you possibly can. And if you don't, you're violating the tax laws. Of course not, right? You can make those sorts of choices for yourself. But for the purposes of child support or spousal support, a judge is going to say, no, you've got to work to something that is reasonably your potential. And by the way, there's other less nefarious examples of this, right? Let's say that, for example, and by the way, you might have made that choice perfectly rationally and just happened to benefit. So I say nefarious, I mean a little less obvious, like a little less obvious. Let's say that you've got somebody who's, a homemaker, who, he decided, and the two of them decided 5 years ago that he was going to drop out of the workforce and raise the kids. And now they're splitting up and they're getting divorced, and we're trying to figure out what his income is. And he hasn't earned any income in 5 years. Well, but let's say that he's, he hasn't earned any income for 5 years, but he's got a high level degree and he's got wonderful experience before he left. And he could go and maybe he could re-enter the workforce and start working again. A judge is going to say, okay, you can't just sort of stay on the sidelines. Yes, that's the decision that you guys made when you were married, that you were together, that you were going to exit the workforce and help raise your kids, but that's not the situation. And now you have a responsibility, you have an obligation to go back to work. Now, understand, a judge can't order anybody to work. Yeah. Right? The judge can't say to you, you must work, and if you don't, I'm going to throw you in jail. No. All a judge can say is that for the purposes of calculating these numbers, of figuring out what you owe in child support, we are going to assume that you are working and that you are earning some amount. By the way, the burden here is not on me to prove that I can't work. It's on the person who's making the claim that income should be imputed. And by the way, so there's a lot that goes into that. There's people called vocational experts that will hire and who can then testify and say, okay, somebody like this, who is this age, who has this kind of experience, who's got these kind of degrees, here are the jobs that person could get. And by my calculation, a person like that could make $50,000 if that's a year, if that's what they decide to do. Judge is going to say, okay, I'm imputing $50,000 a year. Whether you work, whether you don't work, that's what the bar is being set. Okay. And some of the last one, by the way, this is not an exhaustive list. It's just a list that of sort of things to highlight and big ones. And the last one is substantial assets. And this one's the easiest to prove, right? Let's say that I have, let's say that Bob is getting divorced. And Bob, he doesn't earn any income, but Bob has, he retired 10 years ago. He just retired. And the reason he retired is because he won the lottery and he's got $100 million in the bank. Okay. But for whatever reason, he's not interested in earning money with his money. Bob just likes, he just likes the look of dollar bills, right? So he has literally his whole $100 million sitting in a bank in a safe deposit box. That would be a pretty big safe deposit box in $10,000 bills, and that's how he keeps his money, and that is therefore earning nothing, right? Because a $10,000 bill today is a $10,000 bill tomorrow. He'll have zero income, right? His income taxes will say, by the way, after he's made it, like it's 10 years later, we'll say he earned zero money this year. But what a judge is going to say is, no. Whatever you want to do, that's fine. But we're gonna say, for the purposes of child support, what would that money be doing if you weren't a sort of a crazy person? Right? If you weren't a person who just likes to have their entire fortune in shiny nickels. You're a person who invests prudently, not riskily, not the maximum, right? You don't have to buy more lottery tickets and hope that you win the lottery. But we're going to assume that you invested in a reasonable portfolio, making a market kind of level return. And how much would somebody like that earn? And, there's a rule of thumb, and it changes depending on the investment environment. Usually it's like 3.5% after taxes. That's kind of where the number would be. But there's no magic to it. And that's something that you would show and prove with an expert. But again, that's a time that you'd say, okay, we need to impute some income because this guy is not doing the same way that the last person, right, is not working to their full potential. This person is not putting their money to the full potential. And you can't just make decisions like that in order to try and avoid having to pay child support. And we're not going to let you get away with that. So those are the kind of the big five of money and how we do it.
Interesting. I think I'm personally a little bit, I don't want to say stuck, but still my mind is on the last one on underemployed,
okay.
because I don't know, it just feels like a situation that I've heard more about. And I'm curious about time frames.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned an example about a lawyer leaving a job that was paying $500,000 to teach law for $50,000, which the day before getting divorced.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was a little bit that the timing there shows potentially a different motive, but that's also a choice that like people sometimes make, mm-hmm. right? To switch jobs from a profit-making nature to a not profitable mm-hmm. Position, and that still wouldn't, like, calling someone who's a law professor underemployed feels a little bit confusing to me. So I'm curious about like how, when judges are looking at this, how timing plays into.
It does. It plays into a part. Well, first of all, timing is important because for the only reason that it matters in terms of what could you be doing, right? If let's say that it's not a lawyer, let's say it's a doctor, right? A doctor who's been retired for a month is going to be much more employable than a doctor who's been retired for 15 years, right? Let's say again that it's the doctor who won the lottery and he just decided I don't want to do medicine anymore, right? A judge is not going to say to somebody who's been out of the workforce, well, you go find a job as a doctor. It's like, no, I'm not sure who's going to want to hire me, right? I'm so far out of the game. I'm so far out of medical school at this point. I don't know. So that plays that in. And also in terms of expectations, right? What's the lifestyle that you guys will live in? What's the lifestyle you guys will live in? If I retired just before we split up, right, our lifestyle is going to be based on what it was when I was still working. Mm. Whereas if I retired 10 years ago, 15 years ago, this was the expectation and the understanding. There was no expectation I was ever going to go back to it. So we built our lifestyle, and under those circumstances, it's less likely that a judge is going to say, okay, you're going to pay child support as if you were earning what you earned 15 years ago.
Right.
So it all depends, like so many of these things. It depends on the facts, it depends on the circumstances, and understand something. Like I said, it doesn't, when I said it's suspicious, it doesn't necessarily have to be about that. There could have been a perfectly good reason. There
Right.
could have been a perfectly good reason why you decided that this was the right thing for you. A lot of people, want to go and work in the private sector, right? Like you could come up with a notion of like somebody who wants to be an elected official, and that's fine. And like I said, a judge can't force you to do anything. But what a judge can say is, okay, but you can't make that choice and demand that your children or your soon-to-be ex-spouse pay for it. That's I think the
What if
distinction.
what if you can prove that your soon-to-be ex-spouse and children were on board with that decision? Like you made the comment about elected office. What if it were someone who, so we're in the middle of an election cycle right now. What if it were someone who ran and won a primary, and then between a primary and a general election ended up getting divorced, or between being elected and taking office becomes divorced? Would, if they could prove that that was the decision that the family made together, that would be a
It's a really the answer is I can't give you a blank answer of how it would work, of what the circumstances would be, of what you could draw to say that a judge is not going to then say, well, you should be doing what you were doing before, or we're going to pretend you are. But especially when you're talking about children, right? If you're talking about, I think it might be different, right? If it's child support versus spousal
support.
Because I think if you're talking about child support, the children didn't have a choice.
Yeah.
Whatever we want to say about the children were involved in this decision and the children are supportive and all of that, children are children, and it's up to the state of whatever state you're in to protect them and their interests. On the other hand, there's that. Well, shouldn't our expectation? Why should I have to go back to the job? Maybe I can't go back to that job. Think about how it would look if I suddenly dropped out. I have now an obligation. Let's say that you were elected, right? It's after I've been elected now. I can't just quit my job. I made a promise to people. That's not really fair or right, or something a court should be basically requiring me to do. Because let's face it, if I don't quit my political position and go back to my private sector job, I'll default on these obligations. So it's very fact specific. It's very particular to what's going on, and to the realities of the situation. But it's something that judges look at and make sure, in the sense of like, look, you've got to do maybe not your highest level possible thing, but something in that range, unless you've got a good story of why you shouldn't.
So here's another question that keeps coming up in my mind. You say a judge can't make you work, but a judge can say that this is the level. What does that mean? What power does a judge have, and what happens if you don't make that money?
A child support, especially child support, but also maintenance, are orders of the court, and they follow you around. You can't get rid of them in bankruptcy. They are very strict, and if a judge thinks that you are willfully not paying child support or not paying spousal support, a judge can punish you. A judge can garnish what you do earn. A judge can order you to sell property. A judge can throw you in jail.
Wow.
Right? And now look, is a judge going to throw somebody in that situation in jail? Probably not. Somebody because they got elected to the Senate and they decided, well, I can't keep my old job because I'm not allowed, and I don't want to quit my job as a senator. No, probably not. But, that's why it's all very fact specific. But if what you just say is, I don't care what that stupid judge says. I'm keeping my job I'm keeping my job at the law school, even though a week ago I was making $500,000 as a lawyer. Too bad. I just don't care what that guy says. A judge is gonna find ways to make you pay, or the state of New York otherwise, by garnishing wages, by doing all sorts of things. And child support orders follow people around, right? You can't. It's not like you can say, well, I'll just pick up and move to a different state, and I'll escape that obligation. Alabama is going to enforce a child support order against you, just like New York. New York child support order, just like New York. California is going to enforce a Wyoming one. You can't, there's full faith and credit, and there are very specific laws that are governing that. There's a uniform law that I think every state has passed, if not every state, almost every state, governing the enforcement of child support orders. So it's something that follows you. It's something that courts take very, very seriously. It's something I know the tax authorities take very, very seriously. I believe that both your federal and I know your New York State taxes, if you are entitled to a refund and you owe child support, they will take your refund to pay the child support. So, and I think that in fact there's a portion on your tax return where you have to say, do I owe taxes? Do I owe child support? And if you do, you don't get that refund. It goes to what's called the child support collection. So you can't, like I said, a judge can't force you to work, right? We have a 13th Amendment in this country. A judge can't force you to work, but a judge can make your life pretty miserable if you don't pay what you owe and what they say. So
I do have another question, but I just want to make sure we share that if anybody is watching and has a question that they'd like to ask, that you can just type it right into the Facebook Live comments and we'll answer it live here. Or if someone has a question and doesn't feel comfortable putting it into the chat, or if someone has an idea for an upcoming show, what should they do?
Unhitchinghour@gmail.com is our Gmail site. You can go send any questions and we'll answer them. Or by the way, if you have a proposed topic for a future show, something you're interested in and want to hear about, you can send an email to that. I check that email address and you can send us stuff that way.
Yeah. So, we have not a question, but we have a few comments. So first we have a very exciting visual. I was thinking the same thing when we were talking about the person who won the lottery, who put their money in, I don't know, at some point you said it was nickels, then you said it was
shiny nickels.
Shiny nickels, then you said it was a big safe deposit box, that maybe this person, like Scrooge McDuck, just wants to swim around.
There you go. If Scrooge McDuck were ordered to pay child support to Huey, Dewey, and Louie, even though he's their uncle or their great uncle and not their father, he would, all of the money in the money bin, even though it's not earning interest or anything because it's just cash, a judge would say, okay, well, what would happen if you invested that money in an interest or in an income bearing producing portfolio, right? So the money bin is a liability for child support purposes.
And then we also got some important information here, that when you were talking about child support following you around, that unpaid child support is one of the very few things that can keep you from getting a U.S. passport. So if you haven't paid your child support, not only can you not declare bankruptcy, or it doesn't go away when you declare bankruptcy, it doesn't go away if you move to another state. You also can't get a U.S. passport if you've got. I didn't happen to know that, but it's a very interesting point, right? Child support taken very, very seriously, pretty much everywhere, and rightfully so. So the question that I did have was, so we know that about child support. What about spousal support? Is that taken as seriously? Or
it's not taken. I wouldn't say it's taken as seriously, but it's still taken very seriously. If same in terms of the consequences of it. I don't think, for example, it gets garnished by the IRS spousal support. I'm not sure. I'd have to look into that. Sometimes I speak and then I'm corrected later. But if a judge finds out you're not paying it, still go to jail. It's still not dischargeable in bankruptcy. So it's still treated, and it still gets full faith and credit, right? So it's the same way, like I said, in New York, if there's an order and you go to Alabama and you try and run away from it, your ex-spouse can come to Alabama and say, hey, Alabama, enforce this order, please, because he owes me money. Now, of course, I say that as if it's easy, right? Obviously, there's a practical difficulty of tracking people down, of actually getting a judge to getting a judge to issue an order. There's a lot of steps, it costs money. So I don't want to minimize that, but I just mean to say that it's not as if there's a situation where, some state or another county, right? Another county in the same state is going to say, well, I don't care. I don't care what that judge said. I'm going to decide this differently,
Okay.
right? Or I don't care because who cares? It doesn't work like that. It follows it.
And then I guess one last question I have that I only just thought of now. Can you appeal the imputed income?
Absolutely. You can appeal anything.
Okay.
However, the standard on an appeal is not easy because judges are given, at least in New York, judges are given very broad discretion. As long as they're, what it says in the appellate decisions is as long as there is any sound basis in the record for imputing income, the appeals court is not gonna overturn that, or it's not gonna second guess what the trial judge says. Now, if the trial judge just says that at random, well, you look like a big strapping man, therefore I think you could go and earn $1 million a year, so I'm imputing that to you. No. But if there's really any sound basis or any good reason for the judge to make that decision, it's going to hold up on appeal. So your audience is really not the appellate court. Your audience is really the trial court judge that's in front of you.
Good to know. All right. Well, I don't see any other questions or comments in the chat, but we will see if any.
Yeah. So if nobody else has any more questions, I think we'll call that a wrap on today's episode about imputed income. Thank you for watching. If you missed any part of today's episode and you want to go catch it, they all go up on the YouTube channel. Please head over to YouTube, Unhitching Hour, and go give us a like, give us a subscribe. Really appreciate the support. I am Reed Aronson. I am a matrimonial lawyer here in New York City.
And I'm Vanessa Aronson. I'm his wife.
And this has been the Unhitching Hour, how the law works when your relationship doesn't. Thanks everybody for joining us, and we will see you